One thing we didn't do well back in the days was having people take these positions without any training. You need skill sets to do that well. You are not born a manager, you become one. I'll start from the ICs, which are organized in multidisciplinary squads by functions. Each squad has a manager, which is a frontline manager, and these managers report to the VP of data. Do I see many people wanting to become a manager? Yes, that happens all the time. And very often it's not because that's what they want to do in the sense they are interested in doing that. It's more because that's the only way people think they can grow.
Today, I welcome Emmanuel, who is VP Data at BlaBlaCar, the French unicorn who offers several mobility services. So we have already recorded an episode in French with Manu on the podcast regarding the data team at BlaBlaCar overall. So it's the episode 13 for those interested. We talked about the stack, the team, and a few projects. But today we will talk about what is key to scale a data team at 40 plus people, I guess, even like maybe 50 will tell us more about that. So it's kind of a special episode more focused on management. Hello Manu, how are you?
I feel great. It's good to be back here. It's been over a year and I'm happy to do that exercise. I'm happy to do it in English as well.
Nice. Maybe could you remind us what the data department looks like at BlaBlaCar now, maybe like a year later?
So a year later, what happened in the meantime? So today, a few numbers. We are 40 plus, 49 exactly. We'll be 49 in 2024. It's easy. When I was preparing, I had the rule of 7. So we have 7 team of 7 people on average. So that's 49. And we also have 7 different profiles in the team.
Okay.
Data analysts, data engineers. So I'm sure to forgot one or more. Analytics engineer, software engineer, managers, product owner. And so that makes a pretty wide group. What changed since last time? We did implement a few things, but I guess today it's going to be even more interesting to talk about what changed in terms of management and how I've seen that org work and how I've seen people in that org evolve. And so it's going to be an interesting conversation.
Sounds great. So yeah, actually, the first topic that I wanted to talk to you about, and that actually you told me about when we called each other, is like that one crucial element when scaling a data team will be to introduce managers. So could you tell us what was the context at BlaBlaCar when you did it?
So it dates back a while because I think the first time we had first line managers, so not having a manager for the entire team, but some people in the middle, that dates back to 2017, where we had leads. I was part of that. We weren't called a manager at the time, and each was in charge of like 2-3 people. I was mostly data analytics at the time. I think we did that because the team was scaling and the person in charge couldn't have like 12 or 15 people directly reporting to him. The context was hyper growth, many different topics we wanted to deliver fast, and it's just we were hiring a lot of junior people which needed a bit of mentoring and technical expertise. Fast forward to 2019, the team is bigger. It covers a broader subset of topics. We had data engineering and data science on top of what we had in 2017. And then we started introducing managers that had some management experience from before and from other companies. So it was not just internally moving someone from an individual contributor IC position to a managerial position. It was more bringing expertise from the outside. It was an interesting experience. I remember a few things about that. Some people being a bit frustrated that we stopped moving people internally to managerial position. In 2022, we scaled that concept, and so 2019 we had 3 managers. 2022 we have close to 7. What changed is that we have a mix of like people that came from the outside and people that we've resumed a bit like having ICs internally taking managerial position. Overall, it followed what we needed to build as an organization. And so very early on, it was we needed to scale and we needed to go fast. 2019, it was we needed to start different topics, data engineering, data science. 2022 is more about like how do we organize to be efficient. And you can see how the different profiles, the different managerial profiles, and having that new first line manager position helped the org to deliver on that.
And so like what would you say was the main risk when you introduced managers?
So I guess the problem it solves is at some point to be efficient, you need to have advice guidance for ICs. And that if you're managing 10, 15 people, that isn't possible any longer. So you need that. On the other side, I guess you, from an org standpoint, you also need a bit more structure, and the first line manager can help deliver that because they're going to say, hey, look, actually, we need a roadmap for all of these people, and I'm going to take that on my own and help them organize better to deliver more. But one thing we didn't do well back in the days was having people take these positions without any training and without providing them training afterwards, because management, that's a job. It's not just a position. It's you need skill sets to do that well. You are not born a manager, you become one. So that's something we didn't do super well. Among the things that we did well is I think we managed fairly well the mix of having internal people moving to managerial position and bringing external expertise and an external point of view. That's not always easy, but it's I think it's important to do both. One thing at the time that created some frustration is, yes, at some point, out of a group of people that work together, you're going to have one that is going to manage the other. That creates a bit of friction.
And so another topic we discussed was the mix between middle managers. So I know you don't like that word, and individual contributors. So maybe you said it before, but when you say IC, it means like individual contributors. So could you tell us why this topic is important?
Right. So I think it's important to have a mix of responsibility and to be sure you create two different tracks on which you can go for a long time. One thing I've seen in many companies, or I've seen in many people's mind, is if I want to grow, I need to be promoted to a managerial position. I think that's wrong on a couple of things. One is, it's not really that if you're an IC, you're promoted to a managerial position. It's not a promotion per se. It's a different job. If you're a data analyst, you're not promoted to a data scientist position. Just take a different position. And I think that's important because in the mindset, it creates a leveling that it's better to be a manager than to be an IC. Another aspect is you want a manager to focus on their management role. And for that, you need to have the good mix of responsibilities with the ICs. Otherwise, the tendency is to have the manager do too many things, making all the decisions, taking the driving the technical decisions, making the people decision, driving the team dynamics, and so on and so forth. You need to unpack all of that. Say there are some responsibilities for ICs, there are some responsibilities, for managers, and that's by that split that you make the mix work well. And it's important to have that mix. You can't have only ICs or only managers. You will have to have both. So that's why it's so important to unpack a bit what traditionally I've seen people put in the managerial basket and to distribute it a bit more equally. About the middle management, yeah, I don't really like that term. It creates a mindset of I'm in the middle. I'd rather have first line manager because I think these are the managers that directly talk and interact with the ICs, and it's a fairly different role from managing managers. And the fact that you might be managing managers or 3 times managing managers that manage managers, I think that's very close. Managing ICs is that's a different flavor in the role. So that's also why I'm not so fond of the middle management.
So here we were talking about the front lines managers because you were talking about leads earlier. So maybe you can just recap how it works at BlaBlaCar. So right now it's like your VP data, and then what are the layers?
Yeah. So I'll start from the ICs, which are organized in multidisciplinary squads by functions. Each squad has a manager, which is a frontline manager, and these managers report to the VP of data.
So it's still pretty flat.
Yes, there is one frontline level of managers by construction, but you don't have more intermediaries between the VP and the frontline manager. BlaBlaCar is 800 people group, so and data is like close to 50. The only way you can do that is by having a relatively large squad. And that's the figure I was giving at the beginning. The average team size is 7. And I think that's a good team size. Like when you manage 2-3 people, it's hard to make that a full-time managerial position. Then you default to, hey, I'll take some IC responsibilities, and that creates a very difficult setup for the manager and for the other ICs, because the manager is a bit in between.
So that's interesting. So maybe I didn't grasp that to be true to that extent, let's say like the division between the two roles. So at BlaBlaCar, when you're a manager, you have almost no more responsibility from a project standpoint.
So I'll frame it slightly differently. I'll start by what's the most important. As a manager, the most important is to do the people management, because if you don't do that, no one's doing it, and that creates problem for the team.
So that is like some kind of annual reviews, like weekly, to make sure everything is good, like setting the objectives every quarter. So.
Yeah, I think I would say that's the cool part. You also have the non-cool part of that person's unhappy, and that person decided to quit, and that person wants a raise, but which actually takes a lot of time as well.
Okay.
But so that people management is super important. The second thing I would put is the managing the team dynamics. So making sure that the people that you manage individually, they work well together. So making sure that the team has rituals that make it a team and not just a group of people, that the communication is smooth, that two people don't get along, you're going to fix that, et cetera, et cetera. And then you start having project management. You can have some managers that have more of a individual contributor type like contribution on some projects, but I would expect the manager,
to prioritize the management work first.
Start with the people management, second, the team dynamics, because if you don't do that, no one's going to do it, and then the team will deliver less.
And so I guess one common issue or challenge that you can face when you start to scale a data team and that you introduce a layer of management is maybe to clarify these elements a bit late. Did you experience like some challenges such as like everyone wants to become a manager? Is it even if you implemented what needed to be implemented, is it still the case?
Maybe one important thing, I'm speaking from the vantage point of having seen 8 years of that at BlaBlaCar. So it's not as if like day one we did it perfectly or we did it the way I just described. It takes a while to think about it, to see it in action, and then to say, oh, actually, maybe there are a couple of elements I can structure and frame better. And to your question about do I see many people wanting to become a manager? Yes. Yes, that happens all the time. What's interesting is why so many people are interested in a managerial position. And very often it's not because that's what they want to do in the sense they are interested in doing that. It's more because that's the only way people think they can grow.
Yeah, actually what they want is like bigger perimeters, but of projects. They don't necessarily want all the management part that you discussed earlier, right?
Sometimes I don't think they realize it takes so much time. Because as an IC, you see the problem you have, or maybe you see the couple of problems your close friends have, but you don't realize the manager is having that on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
And that, it takes time and effort. So I think there's that. There's also the fact that in many people's mind, and that was why I was so picky about the wording, like management is perceived as something that's superior to IC, which isn't the case. It's something different. Like a banana is not superior to an apple. It's just a different fruit. And here it's a bit the same. And I think what people have in mind is, hey, I'm going to be promoted to a managerial position. That's the end goal. That's what I need to go there because that's how I get more recognition, more money, more responsibilities, and so on. Once you start breaking that mental bias, then you can have long career for ICs and avoid people switching or by default to management when it's not something they actually want to do and they will enjoy doing.
Yeah. And so just one note before we get into how you tackled a bit this issue, that I don't think this comes from nowhere, because now, I mean, let's say the ecosystem is more and more mature, and we can see every day more companies starting to structure like an individual contributor track, and more tech people that wants to embrace these tracks. But in a lot of companies, and over the past, like maybe, I don't know, from the start of tech and IT, I guess, and in big companies, you can see that most of the developers, after 2 or 3 years, they really feel that if they don't get to a management position, they won't ever like get a bigger perimeter. They won't ever take any decisions, even related to projects, because the sponsors that you can see on the slides of project, they will always be the managers, even if they don't have the technical skills anymore, but they will take the decisions. It's true that it doesn't make sense, and it's completely logical to have like someone with the right technical skills and the right years of experience to be able to take the crucial project-oriented decisions, even if he's not the manager from a people standpoint. Makes complete sense. What would be overall like the key initiatives that you implemented now that you look back on the 8 years that were most impactful to take that turn?
I guess the first and almost the only one is you need to make space for ICs. If you don't, they'll be crowded out, just because managers, given they are handling some of the people budget decision, they'll be in some conversation that it's hard to get ICs into. But you need to create that space. How do you do it? One is move some things that were in the managerial basket to the IC side, because anyway, the managers don't have the time to do that well. So take away all of the technical decisions, part of the project management, and put that on the IC side. And that creates a good setup, because actually, who's the best person to drive an architecture review? It's probably the people that are actually implementing the thing and see it work and have to fix it when it fails and so on. Another aspect is closer to the way we are organized at BlaBlaCar. I think there's in how we are set up, a manager manages different jobs. You know, data scientists, a data analyst, 2 data engineers, and so on. Hence, your ability to provide technical feedback to these people is limited, because you can't be good at everything. And that's where you can create space for ICs. We created chapter lead position, where chapter is a group of people that have the same skill set. And that lead is responsible for defining and making that job efficient, a good job, a strong job. So it could be defining the onboarding program, could be defining hiring exercises, it could be driving some architecture decisions and so on. So there's that. Another element that you need to have to create space is also provide opportunities to ICs. One thing we did, and that I'm both super happy about and very excited about, is we do a lot of internal mobility. So that if you're an IC, the only way is not up, in the sense of an organigram where you're going to take the managerial position. It could be also sideways. Put that way, it doesn't sound super appealing, but actually it means you're taking with you your expertise and you're going to apply it to a new domain. So you're going to learn new thing. Potentially you're going to be in a different setup where you can mentor people. You're going to have different technical challenges. And that's super interesting, because it gives you a way to grow and to learn new things without having to change job and become a manager, a different technical profile.
So maybe could you illustrate a bit how it looks now at BlaBlaCar? So first, maybe you can tell us, like, now when you talk to individual contributors, maybe that are at more junior levels, do you feel that you made it, that now they really see the two paths, and that a lot of them are like, no way I'm getting this management crap, and that actually wants to work on like the more like the technical part and et cetera, and go the IC path?
Yes, I see some people that are, hey, management, yeah, maybe that's something I'll do after like 7 or 8 or 10 years in the job, which at that point I can understand. We've put the emphasis on what's the fundamental difference between managing someone and mentoring someone. And mentoring someone is something that you can do as an IC and that you can do super efficiently and that can bring you a ton of learning and a great experience. At some point, you might become a manager based on, hey, I love to do that. Maybe you don't. So I've seen that change. And overall, I've seen people very interested in the chapter lead positions, into, hey, how do I have more impact by having bigger projects? Can I work on this transversal topic? And that's good because it means that's what they're interested in.
But it's funny because it's true that in the end, I think the confusion is really made with like manager equals decision making. And if you manage to make like the juniors and even people within the community realize that no, actually, when you are chapter lead, you have more decision making responsibilities regarding the projects than the managers. And I think if people realize that, they will be, oh, okay, so maybe I'm gonna go the IC path.
And that's why you need to talk about it. And I was so interested in having that conversation because, yes, I believe many people are making the shorthand of manager equals decision making. The reality is more decision making applies to a quantity of things that's super vast. And yes, there is a part that belongs to the manager. Yes, they will be the one deciding a promotion or having their say in a pay rise. But there are some topics where there are not obviously the most qualified to make a decision. Technical topics being one, project management being sometime in another.
So jumping to the next topic, something that we talked about that I found really interesting was when you said that actually when you scale a data team to more like, maybe it starts at 30 people, but like to 50 people now, it becomes more complicated because you need to anticipate everything and you need basically to anticipate the situation like 3 years before, because if you make the wrong decisions, you will end up in like complex situations. So could you maybe re-explain this for the audience?
It's very interesting because it also shows why there's an element of people in people management that's so important, is that when I look at the organization and we need to, someone leaves, you need to make a decision on, do I replace that person with the same level of expertise? So I backfill that person one for one. Do I pick someone that has more expertise, less expertise? And the reality is that if you make that decision with like a very limited context, saying, hey, I'm making that decision for the next 6 months, you're going to make a very different decision than if you say, hey, look, I'm taking a 2-year period where actually the person I'll hire in 1 year is going to ask me about new things, new project, new opportunities. In 2 years, it's going to be even bigger. I'll also have to manage the people that were younger than that person when she's coming, that will have the same conversation. I'll manage people more experienced that will want to mentor some junior people and so on. So it's actually that if you take only the snapshot at time T, you miss that part. You don't realize that, yeah, you hire someone and in 2 years, they're going to ask you, hey, how do I get to the next level? And you're like, I didn't think about that. That's not a good answer to someone that's asking you what's next. The reality is that it's also a problem that if you have a team of like 2-3 people, it's not that the problem doesn't exist. It's just the consequences of that are fairly small. Once you start managing bigger orgs, it starts to play a lot. If you take that in mind and you think more about the long term, that's also where you can start implementing the topics we talked about, saying, hey, actually, I can do internal mobility. So maybe another team needs someone more junior. So I have an opportunity for someone in that squad to move somewhere else. And that's good. It's creating some opportunities. Maybe it's, hey, actually, if I backfill with someone more senior, that person can then mentor some other people in the team, and that's useful for the org as a whole, etc. So that's why I feel it's so important.
Maybe to wrap up on this topic of management, what was your main challenge, you would say, managing and scaling the data team at BlaBlaCar?
So I guess the very first one is that when I started, I didn't have any experience, and that's a point I made earlier, but that's tough because you're being handed over some serious responsibility. You're in charge of making sure the group is working and you retain them and they deliver and so on. And when you lack the basic training about you shouldn't communicate to everyone the same way, even if that's easier for you because people don't receive the message the same way. How do you manage like career development, and how do you handle difficult conversations, and so on and so forth. You make mistakes, and these mistakes are costly because we're talking about people. So I think the main challenge is like getting that training. It's difficult because if you get the training too early, it's very theoretical. So you're wondering what this is about. If you get it too late, you're like, crap, I made so many mistakes. So the timing of that is difficult, but getting that training is important. The second is there is a level, I believe there is a level of exemplarity and being, sometimes it can be perceived a bit as like being a bit cool or remote, that you need to introduce so that you manage to handle all of the problems and that you get thrown at on a regular basis, and two, that you don't overreact because that's not what's helping people. So when someone is pretty angry, if you get angry as well, usually that's not a good way to solve it. If someone is very sad and you are super cheerful, it's probably not going to be very helpful either. So there's a lot about like thinking about yourself and understanding that it's not role playing, it's not acting. There's a bit of an element that people expect from you to help them, and that means you need to have a bit of control over how you feel, behave, and so on. Otherwise, you don't help them that much.
Yeah, and the last time that we discussed, you told me also about courage. Told me that, so this can seem a bit like what mainstream, but you told me like that when you become a manager, one of the toughest thing to get is that you need to have courage because you will have tough discussions. Could you maybe illustrate like one or two situations that you are referring to when you say that?
Yeah, it takes courage to make tough decision when you have to decide if you're gonna let someone go or if you're gonna stick with that person and try to help them. It's a difficult decision. One, because for the person concerned, even if unemployment benefits are relatively generous in France, it's not funny to end up there. Two is you need to manage the impact on the team when there's a relationship with someone that doesn't work super well, and having the courage to deliver some tough messages. It's not easy to get. Another aspect, it's not trivial, but it happens more frequently, and it's usually it's not a life or death matter, but like promotions and compensation. Usually, you end up in a situation at the end of the year where if you have not prepared them well, people have expectations about what's going to happen. The managers has some constraints about what's going to happen. And when you make the two collide, it could be pretty difficult. And when you have to tell someone, hey, look, I think you wanted a promotion, but this is not going to be this year for X and Y reason. You might have perfectly reasonable argument, but just having the courage to say to that person, yeah, it's not going to happen, and being relatively upfront about it versus an hour and a half of sidestepping and not saying it directly. It's difficult.
And so now you are 50 almost, you said, within the team. What are the next steps? Because I guess your target is not to be like 100 in 3 years. Maybe there is like some stability at some point, or you will be able to scale like to way bigger companies with what you've built so far. So what will be the next challenges?
One is definitely around productivity. Maybe you will keep buying companies and the team will grow, but that's a bit of external growth. So I guess that's why it's so important to be more productive. I think we have a lot of room for improvement there in all different jobs. So that's definitely a challenge. And that's a challenge that's super interesting because it resonates at different levels. There is one part which is a bit the stack and which tool you use. There is a part about process and how you work. There is a part about mindset and what you should think about when you work. There's a part about people and skill sets. What skill set do you need and which people at which position and so on. So I think that's a very interesting exercise. That's a bit always on. You do every quarter, every year, etc.
All right. So we arrive at the last questions. So maybe would you have like content recommendation for the audience?
So recently, I read An Elegant Puzzle by Will Larson. A great book. So Will Larson is a very experienced software engineer, and most of what he shared about was about like management, and I think that applies equally well to data as it could on software engineering. So definitely a super good book to read, and it's written in a way where it's simple and you can pick some chapters and not some others. So
Great. I will put that in the description. What do you love most in data or in your job? You can.
But I can get invited here a few times every other year, so that's cool. I think it satisfies two things. One, curiosity, because there are always some things new and I can learn a lot. The second is it's more about like emulation, like intellectual emulation, because you work with fantastic people, and it's a good way to drive you forward, to have yourself give your best, and so these two.
And what would you say help you progress the most as a manager so that we stay on topic?
Three things. My manager, and because that's like his experience was invaluable in understanding what I should do, some difficult situations I had to get myself out of, and so and his feedback was super precious. Second is trainings. And we are lucky because BlaBlaCar is investing a lot in that. And I had the opportunity, and I'm lucky enough to have had several trainings over the year, and that helps a lot. And the last part is thinking a lot about yourself and understanding that the way you internally work, the way you think, the way you communicate and so on is yours. It's very personal, but that's not necessarily how other people work and need to listen and need to communicate. And so keeping that in mind means you can adapt, and I think that helps a lot the interpersonal relationships.
And just the manager that you talked about, is it still your manager or was it before? But is it like, what is his perimeter?
So Olivier is the CTO of BlaBlaCar.
Okay, CTO. Okay. So it's more like on the people side, or is he also focused on the data part?
So I'm sure he would love to focus even more on the data part, but he's managing a big org because we're 300 plus in product engineering data, so it doesn't have all of his time for me. No, on the people side, it was helping a lot, and both as me as a people manager, but also me as a VP of a large organization. And then we do have great conversation about some of the more data related topics on the stack, how we should do things, and so on.
Excellent. What is the best advice that someone ever gave you?
When I started at BlaBlaCar, I was pretty intense. So I stayed late at work, worked over weekends, not because I had to, but because I loved that. And I think my manager at the time, she shared with me that I shouldn't see work as a sprint, but as a marathon. And it's true, like if you start running and you run for 100 meters, you don't have the same pace that if you start running and you're like, okay, I'll run until I don't know when, but I want to run the longest possible. So I think that helped me realize that sometimes you have to put extra work, but that can't be the normal and the default. Otherwise, you're going to burn yourself.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, Maddie, thank you so much for sharing your return experience on these different topics on management. I had a great time.
Likewise, it was great, and thanks for the opportunity. I know I put the topic a bit on the table, and so I'm super happy that we could make it.
Great. See you soon.
See you. Bye bye.